welcome to the stage our next speaker, Holly Mickelson, with the topic of Regulate This, writing for the medical industry, medical device industry. Holly Mickelson, everyone. Thank you.
Good morning. Hi, everyone. My name is Holly Mickelson, and I'm here somewhat as a representative of my company, Brain Lab, in Munich, Germany. But I'm also here to talk about, sort of on a broader scale, what happens when you work as a technical writer in a highly regulated industry. So I'm going to start by showing you a little bit about my company, just to give you an idea. I work for Brain Lab. The company was founded 35 years ago in Munich by a Munich native. And we have at the moment about 2,500 employees worldwide and 25 locations globally. Most of R&D is in Munich itself, so those people who are abroad are mostly just salespeople. I want to preface this by saying this is specifically about my company, so I can only talk about my own experience. I can give you a little bit of information about things I've heard from other people in the medical device industry, but again, it is specific to my experience. To give you an idea of our portfolio, we have about 800 products that we support as technical writers. Some of these are very small, like this item on the left is a biopsy needle. So this is used during surgery, cranial surgery, to take a biopsy. And the other scene that you see there is actually what you might see in a typical operating room, and a good number of those products are from us. So the software, there's a couple versions of that. There's the camera, which is the thing that looks like a Star Wars creature. And we also can work with products from other companies, so an ultrasound device is shown there, and also a microscope. And my favorite, actually, in this picture is that I included it because it has the blue man in it. This is our representative human that we use in our documentation. He's a lot of fun. I could have included the little video of him doing calisthenics, but I did not today. So I'm curious, actually, of those of you who are here, how many of you actually work in a highly regulated industry? Wow, a lot of you. Very cool. Okay, so some of this is going to sound very familiar. Hopefully we can chat a little bit about this, because I'm always curious about how you as technical writers actually manage your documentation and still meet all of these regulations. This is a big issue for us. So here's my team. We're a team of 6. We are at the moment all native speakers of English. This is not always true, but right now it is. And we are all actually from different fields. None of us is actually trained as a technical writer exclusively, and we've come into this from law, from mechanical engineering, in my case from academia, and somehow we all work it together and make this team actually an excellent team to produce our documentation. We collectively have over 75 years of experience. Our newest member joined 2 years ago, and our oldest working member, she's not the oldest, has been there for 19 years already. And here's how we do it. We actually create all of our documentation in English using XML. We're working in Ixiasoft with Oxygen. And we create a variety of document types. So sometimes a big fat user guide of 300 pages, sometimes a leaflet of 2 pages, or a quick reference guide, which is this thing in the middle, which is actually designed specifically for the user. It doesn't have a regulatory purpose. We determine our projects by who has time. So all of us do everything. We don't have specializations. I don't do just cranial. I also do spinal products or radiotherapy and so on. And we are also the interface between R&D and quality management in most cases. So oftentimes R&D comes to us about questions they have about regulatory, and then hopefully we know the answer. If we don't, we might have to go to regulatory ourselves and talk with them as well. And I'll mention this now, but I'll also talk about it later. We also have an error logging system that we use very faithfully because we find that we can improve our documentation very usefully and logically by keeping track of our errors. So that leads to the first question. We've got a great team. We've got a bunch of great products. We're ready to write, right? No. Okay. The first challenge that we run into as technical writers is actually figuring out where this product is going to be sold. Because some products are only going to be sold in one market. Sometimes they're sold on an international basis in most cases. And we need to actually understand how the product is going to be used and by whom before we can determine that factor. So we would want to anticipate what the requirements are going to be for that documentation. So what's the purpose? For us, the most important thing is that, yes, we're writing user documentation. It's intended for users. We write it as if the user is going to be using it. But its primary purpose for us is demonstrating the regulatory aspect of it. So how does it fulfill the requirements as a regulatory document first? It means the entire first chapter is full of really boring stuff that nobody ever wants to read. But it's a requirement for us. We have to do this. But our user guides are also multitaskers. They are also going to be full of more useful stuff later on. And one piece of documentation, in most cases, can actually fulfill all of our requirements for the entire world market. So we have one document for the MDR, which is the medical device regulation in Europe, which would be our primary market. And we would, in most cases, be able to use the exact same documentation without making any changes for the FDA here in the US, and then for our other markets. In a few cases, there are exceptions. For both the FDA and MDR, there is a requirement to include all compatibility of our product. So we have software that works on a certain device. We have to show all those devices. We also have to show all of the instruments that might be used with that software and hardware. Nice. You'd think, okay, so let's just make this easier and we'll put it in a separate document or online. Then you wouldn't have to worry about it. No, it has to be in the documentation. But if you have an instrument that is only sold in the US market and you want to sell it in Europe too, suddenly you have two versions of the documentation. Another variation might be you've just created some new software and it has some new features. But the features have not yet been approved in the US market. Of course, you want to sell it right away, so you have one version for the US that has the reduced number of features. You have the version for the MDR that has all the features. Sometimes they run parallel for a while and then merge. Sometimes they run parallel for several years. Just as a third variation, to give you one, the FDA is very specific about the language that you use, as is the MDR. In a recent product we had, we deal with craniomaxillofacial surgery. Does anyone know what that is? Yes, cool. Having to do with the head is the general translation of that. The FDA doesn't like that word. They like craniofacial. So anywhere we say craniomaxillofacial in our user guide, we have to have a separate version that uses craniofacial for the FDA. Okay, so why does this matter, this MDR thing? For us, we used to be under MDD, the Medical Device Directive, which was actually not a regulation. It just said, your documentation needs to cover this stuff, then we know you're okay. In 2021, they switched to the MDR, and things got a little bit harder for us. They became much more specific about what you had to include. At a bare minimum, anything that you released, that you wanted to release under MDR, that was approved for MDR, you would have to re-release again because you now have a CE label inside the document that says it's MDR. One small thing. There's also an MDR conformity assessment, so they have to go through the whole process again. So even if nothing has changed, you still have to go through this process. I've already talked a little bit about compatibility. This was also an issue that did not come up with the MDD so much. We could, at times, just leave out compatibility altogether because there was no risk involved, so we just didn't include it. But now we have to. There's also very specific language requirements, as I talked about, and one that given us fits for years now. One medical device, one user guide. So this is normally okay, but if you have a medical device that actually is a device for radiotherapy. So it works with non-Brainlab products, say a linear accelerator. So you'd put that in your bunker, in your hospital. And it also works with your software, and it has instruments that work with it. With all the requirements that are in there, it's actually about a 700-page document. No customer wants a 700-page user guide. So we were able to actually split that up and make that work for us. But for a long time, we thought every user guide that we had, every product that we had to be in one user guide. So we've gotten a little soft on that one. Registering devices under the FDA, I've mostly just included this here just so you can see a small comparison. When we register a product that has already been approved by the MDR, in the US, we would actually look for a predicate device. So a device that already exists. If this thing is there, usually the process is quite simple. We don't have to go through a very complicated release process, but it does take time. Sometimes it can take up to a year to get approval for a new feature or a new product. Another thing I will talk about in a bit more detail is also the cybersecurity requirements, which are much stricter in the US than they are in the EU at the moment. So what does this look like for us as technical writers? This is actually an important point. So we were told in 2021, we have a new regulation that we need to follow. But it's actually very broad. It's not very specific about what you need to do. So that means every company has to go in and interpret that information for themselves to start with. So quality management or regulations is telling us what to do. They pass it on to us. We make those changes. We pass it back to them. The product gets approved or not. And the cycle continues around and around. It's, 4 years in now? And we are still making changes for things that we didn't get quite right the first time. And even talking with other companies in the EU about how to interpret these regulations, companies are interpreting them very differently. So it's actually quite complicated. So let's talk briefly about the second challenge I wanted to mention, which is on top of the MDR and the FDA and any other markets you might have in the world that you want to sell to, you also have to consider industry-specific standards. Sometimes they actually have some interesting requirements for us as well. So just to give you an idea of a few, I'm not going to go into great detail about what these are, but these are some of the standards that we might see on a daily basis in our user guides. Probably the most important is the IEC 60601, which applies to any medical electrical device. And also HIPAA in the US, which has to do with patient data security and disclosure of data. Those are things that we would most certainly be considering. The others here, I don't want to go into great detail on those, but I'm happy to talk about them later and how we've managed to work with some of those. So let's play a game. Here are 4 instruments from our portfolio. We have about 300 instruments in our portfolio. Anyone have an idea what kind of regulations you might run up against for a disposable biopsy needle? No? Okay, what does it do? A biopsy needle, you use it to take a sample from, in this case, inside the brain. I saw a hand. Biological waste, good. Sorry? HIPAA, possibly. Sharp needle disposal, I like that, okay. So disposal of waste. This is a disposable. So disposables have their own rules. So we have to consider that. It's also, as you said, it is biological waste, so also how it interacts with brain tissue. It's a good one. How about a laser registration pointer? This is used before they do navigated surgery. They would use this to measure points on the brain so that the points in the X-rays and MRs actually show up properly in conjunction with what your face actually looks like.
Batteries.
Batteries! Excellent. Yes?
Laser issues.
Lasers, absolutely. Anything else? Medical electrical. All right, so we've also got an electromagnetic instrument tracker. This one works with the camera and with our electrical magnetic device. You plug it in, yes?
Like communication between electronic devices?
Absolutely, okay. Sorry?
Bluetooth communication.
Yes? Yes? Could be cybersecurity. Hopefully not too much. All right, and we've got this last one here. What about these disposable skull pins? They sound great, don't they? I think I'm losing my microphone. Can you still hear me? Good. Right.
No, just was saying.
Yes, oh, thank you. Great. Disposable skull pins? Other than not wanting one of them on your own head?
Are there issues for sanitizing?
Yeah, it's disposable again. So it has to be sterile, definitely. Materials? Cool. Is that a hand back there? Yeah, again, bio-waste. So you can see these are just 4 little tiny things. These are all quite small. You can keep them in your hand. But they do actually, we have to think carefully about what information we might need that our R&D teams didn't send us. Here's another one. This is our Star Wars creature again. This has become an interesting one. The short, squat one is just a camera cart. Or not a camera cart, sorry, it's a display cart. But it's produced in-house, and the original design that we had has batteries in it, as you might expect, but you can't take them out. It's not actually meant for customers to take them out themselves. However, last year's European battery regulation requires that you have some sort of system for customers to take these things out. So we now have to do a complete redesign so that the customers can actually do this. This will also mean we'll have to do a new validation. And it also means that we will have to include new documentation on exploding diagrams on this. And because this is a global product, we also have to include a list of suppliers so customers know where they can buy the right battery from the right person and how to dispose of the old ones. Okay, so what else might impact your documentation? The point of this all was really that it's not always obvious. Your documentation does apply specifically to you, so you can't do a general search. You do really need to look carefully at the individual devices. I've forgotten what I was going to say about this, so I'll just leave this one here. Let's move on. Okay, this is actually also a regulation having to do with cybersecurity, and I made this one its own topic for a very specific reason. Cybersecurity really wasn't an issue in the medical device industry until very recently. It's fairly new to us. This is something we work with developers, software developers. They do what all developers do. They put their code together, they borrow bits and pieces from other places, and they create these wonderful things that do fabulous stuff. And then we use the same bits of software and code in other products, so it's kind of continues the process over and over and over. This is all great and fine, except now with cybersecurity issues, we have to really track those vulnerabilities much more carefully than we ever did in the past. So what does that mean if we don't? This is the danger. This is why people care. There's always that ransomware fear that we're going to completely break down the entire hospital. We don't want to do that. We don't want to be responsible. Actually, the hospital industry or the healthcare industry has become a great source of money-making because people are getting a lot of access to data that they didn't have before. So what does this mean for us as technical writers? It means that we really, in particular, have to pay attention to our predicate or our legacy products. We need to go back and figure out the cybersecurity of those products that we maybe didn't pay much attention to in the past. The concern is that there's too many devices plugged into one one network in a hospital. They all have different operating systems. They all have, maybe they don't get backups or they don't get updates regularly. And it could be devices used by hundreds of different people. So there's inadequate security measures, and patient data is definitely at risk. The FDA says that medical device manufacturers are responsible for this. So that means we have to do something about it. And since 2023, actually all pre-market submissions to the US have to include something like an SBOM, where we can actually track this and keep track of and show that we're keeping track of our vulnerabilities. The challenge for R&D is, of course, finding those problems, finding the things that people did 10, 15 years ago that nobody really cared about at the time. And the challenge for technical writers, and I would love to hear from any of you who have ideas about this, is that we actually have to present this information. So we include a software bill of materials in our user guides, but we also don't want to give anything away. So this is a toughie for us, and I'd really love to talk to anyone who wants to talk about this later. If you have ideas, I can also tell you what we've done so far. So the fourth challenge, and this is the one that interests me the most, I would say. This is something that I care a great deal about, and that's preparing your documentation for an international audience. As I mentioned before, our documents serve a couple different purposes. They serve as a regulatory document, they serve as user documentation, but they also serve as source documentation for translation. We translate our products into about 28 languages, not all of them, but some. And that means that they use our documents as the beginning point. And so we try to make sure that we can avoid a lot of translation problems as we go. So just to give you an idea, this is 3 pages from the same user guide. This is for our, what is this? This is our CIRC, our robotic arm. And these are 3 pages. I believe this is Finnish, Japanese, and English. And you can see, just looking just at the title, that space is always an issue with translations. And there are a couple questions you might want to ask yourself if you are going to do translations. First of all, what languages do you need? If you know ahead of time, great. What else might be translated? Do you translate your GUI? If so, is it the same people doing the translation? Does it match? How will it be translated? Is it translated by a person? Is it translated by machine translation, partially or fully? And what happens if you let AI take it over? We don't yet feel safe letting AI do our translations for us. It's just too dangerous in our industry to do that. We could kill somebody. And finally, how do you control, or how do you handle quality control? Who does your checks? Do you have another translator doing the checks? Is somebody in-house also doing your translations or your checks? Also good questions for yourself. And related to that, this to me is also a key point when you're creating your documentation. This is something you can do for yourself. It makes your documentation better, certainly. But this also plays directly into all of the things I've talked about here so far, about creating consistency in your documentation that you can use later. So this helps us create documents that our translators get right every time. So we reuse a lot of content. We work in a CMS system, so we are able to use blocks of text over and over again. I've lost my microphone here. We can reuse our text if we need to. It also keeps costs down if we can just repeat it, because then translators don't have to look at it again. And we keep a terminology file so that we're always using the same thing from one product to another. I'm trying to give you an example of this. One that matters to us, if you're looking at an X-ray and you need to confirm that your trajectory is correct, you could say, verify the trajectory. You could also say, review the trajectory. But within our company, those are actually 2 different things. If you verify it, you have to click something that it's right. If you review it, you're just looking at it. So we're very careful about making sure we use the same word every time. We also strive for a similar style. We have 6 writers on our team. We could all write the way we want to write, but since we might be working on somebody else's project next time, it's better if we keep the style very consistent. Especially, might be one way of looking at it, the product seems to live a really long time. They just get reused over and over again. So it's actually very useful for us that our documentation uses a very simple style that's easy to translate, but it's also very consistent from one user to another. Not all languages are really created equal, so we have to take space into consideration. And we do think about things like what happens if you use articles? How would those articles get translated? If you add a list and you have some bit of information in between and you precede it by an article, it may cause you problems when it gets to translation. We also try to use graphics as much as we can, because obviously graphics actually do most of the work for you. And we've also learned that we need to document and learn from our mistakes as much as we can. So we do keep a bug file, and probably the most important thing we've learned is that our translators are a great source of information because they read documents very differently than we do. So even though we go through a proofreading process, the translators see it sentence by sentence, and they find more mistakes than we do. So how would I summarize all of this? We've talked about 4 things. We've talked about planning for your market on an international level. We've talked about translation. We've talked about cybersecurity and how this is a new problem for us, and also making your documents consistent. The problem for us is that IFUs have to be regulatory sound. We cannot change that fact. So we have to work with that as best we can. So we try to see our documents as a master document. It has everything you could possibly want. If you want to improve your customer experience, your user experience, what other things can you do? Maybe you can create some sort of supplementary document. In our case, we created the quick reference guides. Those are strictly for customers. They love them. We have the time and the energy to do that, and also the people to do that. We also spend a lot of time on graphics, trying to make the graphics really work for us. But maybe there's other things you can add to your product to make the user experience better. What about video? Can you add video? Videos are great. And finally, we've learned to come to terms with what we can do and do it in baby steps. So we've created a website. All of our documentation is available in HTML as well as PDF. That's how we got the video in. We have, at the moment, one video. But we're getting there, one video. So we're working on that. In general, I would just like to say, I have completely forgotten the ending of this presentation. I know I'm there. This is my last slide. But I just wanted to say thank you all very much. And I would love to talk to you further about any of the points I've come up with here. I have about a gazillion other slides that I took out about 10 minutes ago. So, well, half an hour ago now. So if you have any more information or questions for me, I would love to talk to you. And in general, thank you very much.
Holly Mickelson, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
As someone who is coming from a software documentation background, it's really interesting to see that there are areas of overlap and areas where we can learn from what the medical device industry is doing. So we got some great questions, and we're going to go through them as much as we can. One of the most popular questions here from Jacob, what is your revision rate per manual?
Revision rate?
Yeah, there's a follow-up question after as well.
Well, we publish them. So I would say products get updated maybe once a year top. Depends on what it is. There's a few for things like patient data management. That might get 2 to 3 revisions a year, but in general, no more than that.
Yeah, and then for that process, if you're getting 1 to 2 a year, does that look different in terms of like each time you have to?
Depends on the features.
Okay.
Sometimes a revision is just something like some instrument is no longer available, so we have to update the entire user guide to take 1 line of text out of the user guide.
Yeah, so in that sense, like you're making sure everything is correct before it goes and gets shipped. Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. Next question here from Sieber. Do you have a quality management system and something that is in place to capture the current market and the regulations there?
The QMS system is actually a requirement of the MDR and the
Yeah.
FDA. So that is part of the system, it's built in. And it actually tracks the whole thing all the way through development and regulatory and sales and the whole bit.
Awesome. And from that, then I imagine every employee has training and access to that?
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. When you're considering the regulatory landscape and things that are potentially a risk, maybe like fines or so, how important is it for documentation or these manuals to relate to the function of the product when you're identifying these gaps by regulators?
For us, it's very important.
Yeah.
I mean, technical writers still want to make the user happy. That's our main purpose. And unfortunately, we spend a lot more time including blocks of text to make regulators happy, and that doesn't make us very happy, but it is unfortunately the process that we are stuck with at the moment.
Yeah, this was a follow-up, a question that I saw was related to that for later. In your experience in your career, what have you seen as consequences to not meeting regulations or when there's non-compliance?
Well, if we were non-compliant, we could have our products yanked from the market, which could be very expensive. Huge fines, actually.
Yeah, like
millions.
Yeah, we're talking in many figures. Okay, and then from here, we're looking at another question from Sieber here. How do you evaluate translated versions of these documents?
That's actually a great question. I didn't get to that here.
Yeah.
With translation, we've been working with the same translation agency for over 15 years. They're in Russia, of all places. And we have a system that involves a lot of checks. So a translator uses our system. We have an in-house database, so they're using a translation memory that's based on our product. And they would do the translation. It would then go to a second translator who does a check. And then it comes back to our company, and we always have an internal check of the translation as well. We're a large enough company that we actually have people from all of those markets, and we pay them. It's a really small little thing. It's like $25, but if you pay people, they'll do it. It's amazing.
Everyone appreciates the compensation for extra work that way. Kind of related to the questions about translation, but leveraging graphics and screenshots, do you translate them?
That's actually another really good question. We do not use captions under our figures, ever. Well, okay, there's a few exceptions, but we generally don't. And what we do instead is we have a key or some sort of graph underneath that has all the text that can be easily translated. We found that translating graphics is close to impossible, so we don't. But we do have a system that we've developed where text that would be different in the GUI in a different language would actually show up the same in our translation. So it is linked that way. Even though the graphic itself will show the English version, we don't change it out for the different languages, it would actually show you the correct text in the user guide.
Yeah, and that made me think of IKEA not having any specific language
We
at all.
can't do that yet.
Yeah, there's only so many friendly figures that you can show.
Yeah, they don't do radiotherapy well.
Yeah, that makes sense. It would have a very difficult name to pronounce if you did. So for this question
Stralsund.
here. So the quick reference guide, this question is kind of just, how are those not under regulation requirements?
They're totally extra, and they have to be released with the actual product, so they can't include information that wouldn't technically be in the user guide. It's just presented in a different way. So there's actually a disclaimer on there that says this is not valid without the user guide. But for example, to give you an idea, the software user guides generally in a hospital are going to be used as cup holders. So you put them on your table to put your coffee on. But the quick reference guides are in color, and they're laminated, and they actually hang on the device that is using them. So customers can actually use them, which is nice. They love them.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Kind of related to that, are there internal checklists or sort of cheat sheets, if you will, for product evaluations, for your ability to understand constraints, regulations, sort of market expectations for those products?
We have a lot of stuff in our wiki. A lot of it's collected by us. We try to share our information as much as we can, and we do work closely with the regulatory team. We try to get them on our side and also share information that way.
Wonderful. And I think here for this next one, content reuse factor, you had talked about it earlier. This one, kind of giving more details about that. Do you use variables to manage different terms? Or like what is required by agencies so you don't duplicate things? Or so you don't have to?
We actually, our initial goal was, since we're using a CMS, we have stuff that's all in just little containers. So we wanted to reuse the pieces of information as much as we could from one user guide to another. The problem is that if we use some sort of key definition that adds a changed term, so you have a different product name and you stick that in there to reuse the whole block of text, the problem is that when it goes to translation, it doesn't always work. For example, if you add an article in there, the article may be different for those two different products, and that throws the translators off. They get really upset about that. So we've actually not using reused blocks, whole blocks of text the way we wanted to. It's mostly for regulatory information, or we use boilerplate to set up information so that it's more or less translated or written the same way every time.
Wonderful. In terms of internal service programs for products, do you generate internal documents for service?
Service team is their own thing.
Okay.
They're still working in Word, the poor souls.
So then in that case, if they're their own team, do they follow different regulations, their own?
They're not regulated the way we are.
Okay.
It's mostly internal, so they don't have to worry about the regulatory information at all.
Interesting. Oh.
They use totally different terminology, too. It's terrible. So.
As sort of a follow-up question for that, when you're communicating with someone who's using internal and then you're using that information to feed external, do you have to phrase it as like, here is our audience now, and getting the information from them can be like, everyone here is familiar with just talking to new subject matter experts. Right?
Yes.
Here, we've got a couple more questions that we have time for. How do you balance these regulatory requests with things that are really technical in terms of phrasing, with users who need to understand how those products are used, and they're really looking for simple and clear instructions?
It's a bit of a challenge sometimes. None of us are actually engineers, so we are sometimes a bit challenged ourselves, but we figure that most of the people using our products are also not engineers, so they don't need the technical language in that sense. The exception would be anything to do with physics, in which case I completely trust R&D to tell me the truth, and I produce it word for word, make sure it's English. A lot of our documentation or information comes to us in German, actually, so we have to convert it to English first, and then hope that it works. Just as an aside, one thing we find very interesting, because most of R&D is German-speaking, they see the documentation in English, they sign it off, approve it, say it's great. Then they get the German translation to proofread, and that's when they find the mistakes. So the things we got wrong.
It's so interesting. It feels like the joke of when movies have something really difficult to explain, there's always the person who's like, English, please. And like this is a scenario where you actually
German,
do need it. So I know you'd mentioned it earlier. I'm not sure if we caught that, but Hannah here is asking, what XML authoring tool?
We're using Oxygen. We're using the Ixiosoft. Thank you, Ixiosoft.
Okay.
I think they're produced by Mad Hat. Thank you, Madcap. Yes.
Thank you. So time for one more here. This one by Ken Ricor. What tools and practices are you using to track and maintain consistency across versions and languages?
It's all in the CMS for the most part, so we can do most of our versioning there. And actually, the translations are also in the CMS, so we can keep track of differences from one version to another that way.
Awesome. Holly Mickelson, everyone. That's about time.
Thank you.